Welcome, curious minds, to the deep dive. Today we're embarking on a journey to truly understand a name that, well, for many, it immediately conjures images of conflict, crisis, and deep-seated hardship, Afghanistan. But let me tell you, if your mental picture of Afghanistan is limited to, the stark headlines of war, or maybe the heartbreaking stories of refugee crises, or just these tragic tales of a nation perpetually in turmoil, well, then you are, in fact, only seeing a tiny fraction of the truth.
It's so much more complex.
Exactly. Because behind that single word, Afghanistan, lies a story so incredibly layered, so ancient, and so heartbreakingly human that it just demands a much deeper, much more empathetic look.
Absolutely.
This isn't just a war-torn country. This is the land of profound poets and insightful philosophers, of legendary warriors and powerful kings. It's a land adorned with intricate mosaics defined by majestic mountains. And, maybe most importantly, it is the home of a people who has endured unimaginable hardship with this unbroken, fiercely resilient spirit.
And that precisely is our mission with this deep dive. We're going to embark on a truly comprehensive exploration. We're meticulously extracting the most important nuggets of knowledge and insight from the diverse sources we've gathered specifically for you.
Okay.
Our journey will take us through Afghanistan's tumultuous and complex history. We'll delve into what it was like, long before the shadow of the Taliban fell. We'll examine the intricate periods after their initial rule. And then confront the incredibly difficult and urgent question of what truly lies ahead for its people today. So prepare for those genuine aha moments. We promise to cut through the often overwhelming information overload and provide you with a thorough yet concise understanding of a nation that remains, well, for many, profoundly misunderstood.
Okay, let's unpack this intricate tapestry.
Absolutely. And to truly grasp the complexities of Afghanistan today, we simply have to rewind way back before the headlines we've all grown so familiar with. Imagine Afghanistan not as a distant battleground, but as a vibrant, pulsing heart on the ancient Silk Road. A crossroads.
It was, quite literally, a bridge between civilizations connecting east and west, north and south, for millennia. This unique and supremely strategic location made it an unparalleled melting pot of cultures, of groundbreaking ideas, and of thriving trade routes. And nowhere was this rich cultural exchange more evident than in its capital, Kabul, which, believe it or not, was once famously called the Paris of Central Asia back in the 1960s and 70s.
It's an incredible image, isn't it?
Can you picture that? A truly vibrant city, bustling with an energy that's, wow, that's hard to imagine today. The air filled with the sounds of music wafting from modern cafes where intellectuals and artists would gather. Universities were not just surviving, they were absolutely thriving, buzzing with engaged students from all walks of life. And it wasn't uncommon at all to see women confidently walking through the streets in skirts, not veils. Actively participating in public life, pursuing careers, holding positions of influence. It sounds almost unbelievable when you compare it to the more recent, stark images. But this was a very real, tangible, and recent part of Afghanistan's history.
It really was.
It showcases a different path that was just, well, violently derailed.
What's truly fascinating here is how profoundly that golden era contrasts with the later perceptions many people hold of Afghanistan. While it certainly wasn't a Western democracy in the conventional sense, it had its own political structures, including a monarchy. It undeniably cultivated an environment where culture didn't just survive. It absolutely thrived, it innovated, it expanded, and diversity wasn't just tolerated, it coexisted in this dynamic, interwoven tapestry of ethnic groups and religious practices. This period clearly demonstrates Afghanistan's intrinsic capacity for progress, for openness, and for a rich, multifaceted cultural life. Understanding this pre-conflict reality is, I think, a crucial aspect when we try to comprehend its enduring spirit and the tragic losses it has sustained. It speaks to a deeply rooted societal potential.
And that tapestry of culture and faith runs incredibly deep, stretching back not just decades, but centuries, even millennia. Think about the colossal 6th century Buddhist monastic complexes in Bamiyan, for instance.
The Buddhas.
These magnificent structures, carved directly into towering cliffs, were not just impressive engineering feats, they were monuments to a time when different faiths, particularly Buddhism and later Islam, blossomed side by side, sharing a sacred landscape.
A symbol of that coexistence.
Then fast forward to the breathtaking Islamic calligraphy of the Timurid dynasty in Herat from the 15th century, a testament to another incredibly rich period of artistic and intellectual flourishing, demonstrating Afghanistan's central role in Islamic scholarship and art.
Absolutely stunning work.
Afghanistan was this incredible blend. steeped in the mysticism of the Hindu Kush Mountains, echoing with the profound insights of Sufi poetry. Think of Rumi, who was born in what is now Afghanistan.
Right, Rumi himself.
And sharpened by the keen intellect fostered by its position as a central hub on the Silk Road. It was truly a crossroads of not just goods, but of thought, belief, and artistic expression.
And this cultural richness wasn't confined to ancient monuments or historical scrolls. If we look at cities like Kandahar, Mazar-e-Sharif, and especially Herat, you would find incredibly diverse communities. Pashtuns, Tajiks, Hazaras, Uzbeks, among others living side by side, contributing to the vibrant life of these urban centers. Now, it's critically important to acknowledge that this coexistence wasn't always without its complexities or occasional tensions. No society is perfectly harmonious.
Sure, yeah.
However, there were significant mutual traditions, shared histories, and a vast web of social and economic interdependencies that often bound these communities together. This highlights the inherent complexity and immense richness of Afghan identity, demonstrating how different groups could, and frequently did, forge a collective heritage, despite their distinct origins and occasional friction. It's a powerful testament to the nation's multifaceted and dynamic character, far from the monolithic image often presented.
This brings us to the royal era, particularly under King Zahir Shah, who reigned from 1933 until 1973. It was a period often remembered as relatively peaceful, characterized by gradual modernization and a degree of stability, a true calm before the devastating storms that would follow.
A long reign.
During his reign, Afghanistan saw the establishment of a constitutional monarchy, the introduction of women's suffrage, and significant strides in education and infrastructure, although, mostly concentrated in urban centers.
Yes, and while it was a period of relative calm and indeed progress in many areas, it's vital to acknowledge an inherent structural weakness that existed and would later prove critical. The centralized power during this time was often weak, especially when it came to governing the more autonomous, historically independent tribal regions. Unlike, say, European nation-states, Afghanistan's central government often struggled to assert its authority uniformly across its diverse and fiercely independent tribal areas.
Okay.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, this decentralization, this persistent challenge of fully integrating disparate tribal structures into a truly strong and unified central government, inadvertently laid the groundwork for future instability.
I see.
It meant that even during periods of peace and constitutional reform, the foundations were not as robust as they might have seemed, making the nation inherently vulnerable to external pressures and internal fragmentation later on. Loyalties often remained local rather than national, you see.
Yeah, that makes sense. And that vulnerability was brutally exposed in 1973. A bloodless coup, led by Zahir Shah's cousin and former Prime Minister Mohammad Daoud Khan, ended the monarchy.
The end of an era.
This single event didn't just change leadership. It initiated a profound chain reaction of events that would fundamentally change Afghanistan forever, shattering its fragile stability and setting the stage for decades of dramatic escalating conflict.
A real turning point.
The coup, though initially peaceful, unleashed forces that would spiral far, far beyond anyone's control, which leads us directly into the crucible of conflict, a period that reshaped the nation more profoundly than almost any other. The Soviet invasion and the devastating civil war that followed.
Right.
It all began dramatically in December 1979, when the Soviet Union invaded Afghanistan. Their stated aim was to prop up a faltering communist regime that they had helped install. But the result was far more catastrophic and long-lasting than they could have possibly imagined. What ensued was a brutal 10-year war that claimed the lives of over 1 million Afghans, displaced millions more from their homes,
Staggering numbers.
and absolutely obliterated the nation's fragile infrastructure. But perhaps even more tragically, it systematically destroyed the trust among its people and eroded the very fabric of Afghan society.
The profound and lasting scars left by this period are almost impossible to overstate, and they resonate even today. We're talking about not just the visible, physical devastation of cities and villages, but also deep social, economic, and psychological wounds that have continued to affect generations. This raises an incredibly important question about the long-term, often unforeseen consequences of external intervention.
Definitely.
particularly when a foreign power attempts to impose its will or a specific political system on a sovereign, deeply traditional nation. The Soviet invasion wasn't just a military conflict. It was an upheaval that fundamentally altered Afghanistan, creating a legacy of distrust, fragmentation, and a deeply embedded culture of violence that would linger for decades, making future peace incredibly elusive.
And out of that unimaginable chaos and the brutal resistance to the Soviet occupation, a new complex force emerged. Mujahideen.
The resistance fighters.
These were diverse groups of Islamic fighters, driven by a fierce desire to repel the Soviet invaders and defend their homeland and faith. And they received significant external support, funded by the U.S., Saudi Arabia, and Pakistan.
Right. Cold War politics.
All united in their strategic opposition to the Soviet presence, viewing it as a proxy battle in the larger Cold War.
And here's where we encounter a chilling irony, a truly critical and often overlooked pivot point in Afghanistan's history. Among these very fighters, these Mujahideen factions, were indeed the seeds of what would later become, and this is a difficult truth to confront, the Taliban and Al-Qaeda.
Wow. So the roots are right there.
Exactly. The support for these various factions, while initially aimed at fighting a common Soviet enemy, had profoundly unintended and ultimately tragic consequences. The West, primarily the U.S., focused on a military victory against the Soviets. However, many Mujahideen factions, fueled by years of brutal war, saw it as a stepping stone towards establishing a puritanical Islamic state. Leveraging the power vacuum created by the conflict and existing tribal and religious loyalties to consolidate their own radical interpretations and agendas.
So it wasn't just about kicking the Soviets out for them.
Not for all of them, no. This short-sighted tactical approach of arming disparate groups without a comprehensive post-Soviet political strategy inadvertently nurtured elements that would later turn into formidable threats, not just to Afghanistan's future stability, but to the global community itself. This period, therefore, sets up the complex and tragic lineage of future conflicts that would plague the region and resonate across the world.
The Soviets finally withdrew in 1989. A victory for the Mujahideen, you could say, but their departure tragically didn't bring peace.
No, far from it.
Instead, it unleashed an even more horrific period of lawlessness and internal strife. A brutal civil war erupted among the very Mujahideen factions that had fought the Soviets as they turned on each other, vying for power and control.
Chaos ensued.
Warlords seized control of cities, plunging the nation into a harrowing abyss of anarchy. Daily life became an agonizing struggle for survival, marked by pervasive violence, with widespread rape, looting, and indiscriminate shelling becoming the horrific norm. People were just trapped.
Trapped between warring factions with no central authority to protect them. This profound state of lawlessness, this complete vacuum of central authority and basic security, created what can only be described as the perfect environment for a new, seemingly corrective force to rise.
Okay.
Here's what's truly striking. Out of this widespread desperation, out of a yearning for any semblance of order, the Taliban emerged in 1994, rapidly gaining control and then seizing Kabul in 1996.
So they rose out of that chaos.
Precisely. They promised to restore order, to bring an end to the anarchy that had consumed the nation, and initially, many desperate Afghans, weary of the constant violence and uncertainty, actually welcomed them.
I can almost understand that desperation.
Yeah, but as history would soon reveal, that order would come at an unimaginable cost, a price that continues to haunt the nation to this day. They stepped into a profound void, offering a rigid, unforgiving structure where chaos had reigned, and that offer, tragically, resonated with the population pushed to its absolute limits.
And that brings us to the first reign of the Taliban, from 1996 to 2001. They swept to power as a deeply reactionary force, one that was not simply an organic political movement, but was profoundly shaped by its origins.
Right.
They largely coalesced from religious schools, the madrasas predominantly located in Pakistan, particularly along the border regions. These weren't just traditional educational institutions. They were formative environments that instilled a very specific, rigid, and puritanical ideology, often emphasizing a narrow interpretation of Islamic law and, crucially, martial training.
Precisely. Their ideology was significantly shaped not only by the madrasa education, but also by the pervasive war trauma that had scarred an entire generation. Many of their initial recruits were orphans or young men who had grown up knowing nothing but conflict. Right.
Making them susceptible to a rigid black and white worldview that promised clear answers and swift justice. This was tragically combined with crucial support from certain elements within the Pakistani state, particularly its intelligence services.
Pakistan's role. Yeah.
Pakistan saw the Taliban as a strategic asset, essentially, to create a friendly, stable, and religiously aligned neighbor, providing them with funding, training, and safe havens. These formative experiences and external alliances deeply influenced their approach to governance.
I see.
It wasn't just a political movement, it was a deeply ingrained, almost visceral reaction to the chaos they had witnessed and experienced, leading them to impose an extremely strict and, frankly, oppressive interpretation of Islamic law. Their experiences of war, coupled with this specific religious indoctrination, solidified their belief that a rigid framework was the only path to restoring order and virtue.
And strict is such an understatement, it barely scratches the surface of their rule. Their regime imposed one of the harshest interpretations of Islamic law in modern history, particularly devastating for women and girls. Absolutely brutal.
Women were systematically erased from public life, banned from work, forbidden from attending school or universities, and even prohibited from leaving their homes without a male guardian, a restriction that essentially imprisoned them within their own houses.
Yeah, complete lockdown.
The cultural landscape was decimated too. Music was banned, television was outlawed, even innocent pastimes like flying kites, a beloved Afghan tradition, were prohibited. Public executions, floggings, and amputations become a common, horrifying spectacle in sports stadiums, used as a brutal means of public control and widespread intimidation. The world watched in horror as a vibrant culture was systematically dismantled.
The impact on daily life and the systematic suppression of personal freedoms under this regime were profound and pervasive.
So what does this all mean for the Afghan population, especially its women?
Yeah, what did it mean? It meant a complete dismantling of individual agency, particularly for half the population. It was a severe restriction on cultural expression, intellectual pursuit, and basic human dignity. It wasn't just about controlling actions, it was about controlling thought, aspiration, and even the very spirit of people.
Wow.
Creating an atmosphere of palpable fear and deep deprivation that fundamentally altered the lives of millions. The systematic nature of these bans indicates a deliberate, almost surgical policy to reshape society according to their rigid fundamentalist worldview and to erase any elements of perceived Western influence or traditional Afghan culture that they deemed impure.
And their ideological fervor extended to cultural destruction on a truly grand and shocking scale. In March 2001, they committed an act of cultural genocide that truly shocked the world and drew widespread condemnation. The deliberate destruction of the 6th century Buddhas of Bamiyan.
I remember that vividly.
I remember we talked about these ancient, magnificent carvings earlier, how they represented Afghanistan's deep and diverse cultural tapestry, a testament to its pre-Islamic heritage. Their obliteration was a deliberate, calculated attempt to erase history, a symbolic act of defiance against any heritage that didn't align with their narrow, puritanical ideology.
A devastating loss.
As a direct result of these and other actions, Afghanistan became a pariah state on the global stage, recognized by only 3 countries: Pakistan, Saudi Arabia, and the United Arab Emirates. It was profoundly isolated.
This international isolation wasn't just a diplomatic formality. It had very real, very dangerous consequences for the global community. It effectively facilitated the unchecked operation of terrorist groups within Afghanistan's borders.
How so?
With virtually no external oversight, no international pressure, and no real legal framework to challenge them, groups like al-Qaeda could establish bases, recruit, train, and plan devastating attacks with virtual impunity.
A safe haven.
Exactly. This period of extreme isolation created a dangerous haven for global terrorism, allowing dangerous ideologies and extremist networks to fester and spread without any meaningful challenge from the international community. This was the critical blind spot that would lead to catastrophic global events.
And indeed, it was the fact that Osama bin Laden and his al-Qaeda network operated freely within those Taliban borders that ultimately set the stage for the world's tragic attention to be drawn back to Afghanistan with devastating consequences.
The prelude to 9/11.
And so the world attention was forced back onto Afghanistan in the most devastating way possible. After the horrific September 11, 2001 attacks on the United States.
Right.
Following 9/11, the U.S. launched an invasion of Afghanistan with 2 clear primary goals: to dismantle al-Qaeda, the terrorist organization responsible for the attacks, and to remove the Taliban from power, given their harboring of Osama bin Laden and their refusal to hand him over.
What's truly fascinating here, and perhaps deceptively simple in hindsight, is the speed of that initial military success. The Taliban government, which had seemed so entrenched and oppressive, fell within a matter of weeks by early December 2001.
Really fast.
The military objective of routing al-Qaeda and removing the Taliban from power was achieved with remarkable swiftness. However, this immediate success led to a pivotal and, in retrospect, very complex decision. The mission rapidly shifted from a narrowly defined counterterrorism objective to an incredibly ambitious and sprawling project of nation-building.
The mission creep.
Exactly. This was a significant expansion of scope, moving beyond tactical military goals to attempting to fundamentally reshape Afghan society, its governance, its economy, and its security institutions from the ground up, a challenge far, far more complex than initially perceived.
And the commitment to that nation-building effort was immense, both in terms of human effort and financial investment. The West, led by the U.S., poured hundreds of billions of dollars into Afghanistan, genuinely trying to create a democratic, stable, and self-sufficient state.
Huge sums of money.
And for a time, there were tangible, undeniable successes, particularly in the urban centers. New schools opened their doors, offering education to a generation that had been systematically deprived under the Taliban.
Real progress.
Women, who had been brutally oppressed and erased from public life, returned to universities, to parliament, to public service, and to economic roles. Media flourished, a new constitution was drafted, and elections were held. A new generation of Afghans was indeed born into a period of relative freedom and unprecedented possibilities, experiencing opportunities their parents could only have dreamed of.
Yet alongside these successes, there were pervasive, crippling challenges that ultimately undermined the entire effort, creating a tragic paradox. This raises an important question. Why, despite such massive investment, despite genuine international good intentions, and despite the initial progress, why did corruption, warlordism, and fundamental strategic missteps plague the mission to such an intractable degree? The successes, as you mentioned, were often concentrated in the cities, creating a stark and dangerous contrast with the vast rural areas. In these rural parts, the central government's reach was weak, and the Taliban slowly but steadily regrouped, exploiting local grievances and power vacuums.
So they were still out there?
Oh, yes. They were fueled by a diverse array of funding sources: the lucrative drug trade, particularly opium cultivation, foreign money from sympathetic elements, and deeply embedded tribal networks, all allowing them to rebuild their strength and influence away from the gaze of international forces. The failure to address systemic corruption, to effectively disarm and integrate warlords, and to truly understand the complex local dynamics created fertile ground for their resurgence.
The conflict dragged on, becoming tragically the longest war in U.S. history, spanning 2 decades. Billions more were spent, thousands of lives were lost, and the war became an increasingly heavy burden. An immense toll. And then, after years of debate and strategic shifts, in August 2021, the U.S. finally completed its withdrawal of forces.
And the aftermath was swift and absolutely devastating. The Afghan government and its national army, which had been propped up by international support for so long, collapsed with breathtaking speed, almost literally like a house of cards.
It was shocking how fast it happened.
What's truly remarkable and deeply unsettling here is the historical echo. The Taliban returned to power, taking Kabul almost exactly 20 years to the day since they were first ousted by the US-led invasion.
20 years.
This cyclical return of a repressive regime, after 2 decades of immense sacrifice and investment, carries profound implications. It forces us to confront difficult questions about the efficacy of long-term foreign intervention, the resilience of deeply entrenched ideologies, and the tragic, almost inevitable repetition of history for the Afghan people, who once again find themselves under the very same rule they struggled for so long to escape.
And so, we arrive at Afghanistan after the Taliban's return in 2021, and the harsh, often brutal reality of its consequences today. The Taliban now rule again, and when they swept back into power, they initially made public promises of a more moderate face.
Right, the Taliban 2.0 narrative.
Suggesting they had evolved, learned from their past mistakes, and would govern differently than their previous brutal regime.
But the grim reality has unequivocally and systematically contradicted those initial promises. The evidence is stark and undeniable. Women are, once again, systematically being erased from public life and denied fundamental human rights at an alarming pace.
That's heartbreaking.
Concrete examples abound. Girls above grade 6 are now banned from school, effectively denying an entire generation of girls their fundamental right to education and their future prospects.
That's gone.
Women are barred from working in most fields, including critical roles in non-governmental organizations, NGOs, and even the United Nations, crippling essential services and economic independence for countless families. Protests by courageous Afghan women are brutally crushed, often met with violence, and brave activists are routinely jailed or simply disappear, their fate unknown.
Unbelievable bravery, though.
Absolutely. If we connect this to the bigger picture, this isn't just about specific prohibitions or isolated incidents. It's about systematically impacting the fundamental rights and the entire future of half the population, effectively dismantling decades of hard-won progress and crushing hope for an inclusive society.
This systematic oppression, coupled with the nature of the Taliban's return, has been met with severe international repercussions. The Taliban government is not recognized by virtually any country in the world, maintaining its status as a pariah state.
Still isolated.
And, critically, billions in Afghan assets held abroad, primarily by the Afghan Central Bank and Western institutions, have been frozen, further crippling the nation's already fragile economy.
And these factors are directly connected to a rapidly worsening and truly catastrophic humanitarian crisis. The economic isolation and the freezing of national assets have virtually crippled the country's banking system and economic activity, leading to widespread suffering on an unimaginable scale. The severity is staggering. As of recent reports, over 90% of Afghans are now food insecure, meaning they do not have reliable access to sufficient nutritious food.
90%.
Humanitarian aid is trickling in, but it's nowhere near enough to meet the immense needs, and people are literally starving, resorting to desperate measures to survive. The international community's dilemma is agonizing and complex. How do you provide essential aid to a suffering population without inadvertently legitimizing or strengthening a regime that is actively violating human rights on a massive scale?
Yeah, it's a terrible catch-22.
Yeah.
This brings us to a crucial, heartbreaking question that underlies many of the current headlines and drives global migration patterns. Why are so many Afghans displaced, both inside and outside their own country, in such overwhelming numbers?
Yeah, the displacement is massive.
The reasons are heartbreakingly clear and interconnected. First, there's the pervasive poverty and hunger, with that staggering statistic that 90% of Afghans are food insecure, leading to a desperate struggle for mere survival. Families are selling their meager possessions, sometimes even worse.
Unthinkable choices.
Second, there's severe persecution, especially targeting ethnic minorities like the Hazaras, who have a long history of discrimination, but also journalists, academics, human rights activists, and of course women. Their lives are in direct danger, prompting desperate flight.
Targeted persecution, yeah.
And third, there's the crushing reality of having no future. With virtually no access to education, especially for girls, or legitimate jobs, particularly for women, families are risking absolutely everything, their savings, their lives, undertaking perilous journeys to send their children abroad, hoping for even a glimmer of opportunity, a chance at a life free from repression and destitution.
The scale of this crisis is truly immense and represents one of the largest humanitarian emergencies globally. We're talking about 1.8 million Afghans who are displaced today, both internally within the country, having fled their homes due to conflict or disaster,
8 million.
and across international borders, seeking refuge in neighboring countries or further afield, from Turkey to Pakistan, from Iran to various countries in Europe. Afghans now constitute one of the largest refugee populations in the world, undertaking perilous journeys.
Wow.
So what does this all mean for the global community? It signifies an immense and ongoing humanitarian challenge, placing enormous strain on neighboring countries and international aid organizations. It's a crisis that demands urgent global attention, sustained compassionate responses, and a deeper understanding of its root causes.
Yeah.
As the implications of such vast displacement ripple far beyond Afghanistan's immediate borders, affecting regional stability and global migration patterns.
Now, to understand some of the internal complexities and vulnerabilities within Afghanistan, it's important to briefly touch on the Sunni and Shia dynamics, which have profound historical and social implications.
Right, the sectarian element.
The country is overwhelmingly Sunni, making up about 85% of the population, mostly adhering to the Hanafi school of thought, which is one of the 4 major traditional Sunni schools of Islamic law. The Taliban themselves are staunchly Sunni, from the Deobandi school, which is a very conservative branch of Hanafi.
However, the Shia population, which constitutes about 10–15% of the population and is predominantly made up of the Hazaras, has historically faced significant and often brutal discrimination in Afghanistan, extending back for centuries due to their distinct ethnic and religious identity.
A long history of hardship for them.
And tragically, under the current Taliban rule, that persecution has not only continued but has intensified dramatically, often with a sectarian fervor. This raises an incredibly important and chilling question about targeted violence. Shia mosques have been bombed, Hazara neighborhoods have been attacked, and there are very real, palpable fears among many of another systematic genocide, reminiscent of past atrocities against their community. This sectarian violence adds another devastating layer to the ongoing humanitarian crisis and deepens the ethnic displacement, as Hazaras flee not just poverty but direct threats to their existence.
Yet, despite all this profound hardship, despite the war, the repression, and the displacement, Afghanistan is so much more than its headlines of conflict and the rigid ideology imposed upon it.
Absolutely. The cultural resilience is incredible.
Its culture, though constantly under siege, is incredibly resilient, enduring through sheer force of will, passed down from generation to generation. Its poetry, for the timeless universal verses of Rumi and the fierce Pashtun warrior poet Kushal Khanakatak. The raw, contemporary voices emerging even now from hiding in exile still echoes in alleyways and hushed conversations and online, a testament to an unbroken literary and spiritual tradition.
Poetry is so central.
Its music, though officially banned, is kept alive in the quiet corners of refugee camps, shared furtively through mobile phones and YouTube videos, a powerful act of defiance. And the intricate handicrafts, the exquisite calligraphy, the rich oral traditions of storytelling and epic recitations, they continue to survive.
Yeah.
Often carried by a vibrant diaspora, determined not to let their magnificent heritage fade into oblivion.
Keeping the flame alive.
The Afghan soul truly refuses to die, even when the body is bleeding, even when it's under immense pressure. It's a powerful, persistent force that defies easy categorization. This brings us to the most painful, most urgent question of all. What is the future of Afghanistan? It's a question with no easy answer, a future shrouded in profound uncertainty and complex dilemmas.
The prognosis, frankly, is grim if current trends continue unchecked. If the Taliban do not fundamentally change their oppressive policies, particularly those targeting women and minorities, and if the world continues to isolate the Afghan people, and it's crucial to distinguish the people from the regime.
Right, that's key.
The already catastrophic humanitarian crisis will only worsen. The suffering will deepen, access to basic necessities will dwindle further, and the country risks spiraling into an even more desperate and intractable state, becoming a perpetual emergency. This is the stark reality that must be confronted by the international community.
But despite that grim outlook, despite the monumental challenges, there is indeed hope. And that hope, crucially, does not primarily lie in governments or international bodies, but in the extraordinary resilience, ingenuity, and defiance of Afghans themselves.
Yes, in the people.
It's in the incredible strength of the people. Afghan women, defying immense danger and risking their lives, are leading underground schools, ensuring that the next generation of girls can still learn to read, write, and dream.
Incredible courage.
Afghan youth are secretly coding, writing poetry of resistance, and creating media, pushing back against the darkness even from hiding. And the vast Afghan diaspora spread across the globe is relentlessly pushing for international recognition of Afghan voices, advocating for their homeland and refusing to let their story be forgotten or misunderstood.
They are a powerful force.
They are the living, breathing embodiment of Afghanistan's enduring spirit.
The next chapter of Afghanistan may very well be written in the dark, under immense pressure and hardship, with immense challenges still ahead. But the ink, without a doubt, will be resilience. It's a powerful and poignant reflection on the unwavering spirit of a people determined not just to survive, but to preserve their identity, to resist, and against all odds to eventually thrive. Their story is a testament to the human spirit's capacity to endure.
Afghanistan is a wounded country, yes, but it is not broken. It is not just a place on a map. It is a people, poetic, powerful, profoundly proud, who, despite unimaginable trials, continue to deserve peace, justice, and the fundamental right to dream of a better tomorrow.
Well said.
We've taken a deep dive into Afghanistan's enduring spirit, tracing its incredibly complex journey through centuries of triumph and tribulation, and its constant, often agonizing struggle for identity amidst both overwhelming external pressures and difficult internal division.
It's a lot to take in.
It's a story marked by profound challenges, but also by an undeniable, unbreakable spirit that continues to inspire.
And their story is far from over. And neither is our shared human responsibility to them. We hope this deep dive has offered you new insights, challenging preconceptions, and prompting you to reflect on the multifaceted realities of a nation and its people who have shaped so much of world history. Understanding these global complexities is not just an academic exercise, it's a vital step towards a more informed, a more empathetic, and ultimately a more compassionate world.